I woke up that Friday morning not to the sound of roosters or the rattle of my old Ford pickup, but to a bass line so heavy it vibrated the floorboards of the Ironwood Ranch farmhouse, the same house my great-grandpa built with his own two hands. I looked out, coffee cup halfway to my lips, and swore I was still dreaming. It wasn't a dream. My 20 acres of prime grazing land, fenced, posted, and deeded straight back to 1912, looked like a pop-up music festival had exploded overnight. 500, maybe more, tents, RVs the size of double-wides, neon flags, and campfires stretching across my pasture like some kind of viral infection. And right in the middle of it all, perched on a foldable banquet table, stood Veronica Sterling. She was the queen of the HOA, the self-proclaimed empress of the estates at Copper Creek, and she was yelling into a megaphone, "Welcome, everyone, to our inaugural Freedom Campout on the Copper Creek Greenbelt." The Copper Creek Greenbelt, in Veronica's mind, was my land, my pasture, the home of the Black Brigade. I didn't remember sending out invitations, and I sure as hell didn't remember giving her, or anyone in that plastic subdivision, permission to treat my family's heritage like a state park parking lot. The campers cheered, cracked beers, and lit bonfires while my posted "no trespassing" signs flapped in the breeze, ignored like old newspapers. Now, a lot of folks would have lost it right there. Called the sheriff, started screaming, maybe grabbed a shotgun. But I'm Ethan Miller. My dad always said, "Son, you don't climb into the ring with a fool, especially not on their terms." So, I poured another cup of coffee. I put on my worn-out work boots, and I smiled, because Veronica wanted a show, and I was about to give her the kind of theater she'd never forget. You don't grow up on a ranch without learning two things fast: how to mend a fence in under 10 minutes, and how to spot trouble walking toward you from a mile away. Trouble, in my case, wore a wide-brimmed sun hat, carried a clipboard, and answered to the name Veronica. My land, the Ironwood, sits right where the city ends and the real world begins. For 4 years, ever since Veronica moved in and voted herself president of the HOA, mostly because nobody else wanted the grief, she'd been trying to sanitize the view. My barbed wire fence, weather-worn and doing its damn job, was an aesthetic hazard. My herd of 24 black Angus bulls, huge, lumbering, calm as church mice, were, in her exact words, a public liability and an eyesore. She hated that my ranch disrupted her perfect suburbia. It started small, letters about unauthorized fence paint, petty warnings about the noise pollution from cattle. I laughed it off at first. Then it escalated. She tried to fine me for not joining her HOA, even though my deed predated their development by 50 years. The real tipping point? They paved a community trail right up to my fence line. Their glossy brochure bragged about unprecedented access to greenbelt views. She was using my private property as a selling point. And now this. I got into my old truck and drove down to the north gate. The gravel driveway was completely blocked, a chaotic logjam of shiny RVs and lifted pickups. I saw fire pits being dug into my grass, generators coughing fumes, kids running wild, tearing down my no trespassing signs like they were souvenirs. A kid in a reflective vest and sunglasses, smelling faintly of cheap beer, swaggered over. His plastic badge read, "HOA Camp Security." "Sorry, buddy." He puffed out his chest, waving me away. "Campgrounds are at capacity. You'll have to park elsewhere." I leaned out the window, my voice low. "Son, I'm Ethan Miller. You're standing in my driveway, and you're trespassing on private land." He just blinked, muttering something about checking with President Veronica. She appeared a minute later, clipboard under one arm, sunglasses covering eyes that were already full of malice. She didn't look nervous. She looked ready. "Oh, don't mind the rancher, folks," she boomed into the megaphone. "He's just being dramatic. The community has spoken. The Greenbelt is ours to enjoy." The crowd cheered, lifting their beers in a toast. I got out of the truck. "Veronica," I said, pitching my voice to Carrie, "you have 500 people on my deeded land. Every tent, every campfire, every dirty diaper is trespass. I called the county on this road issue before. You know exactly where the boundary is." She raised the megaphone again, that fake smile stretched across her face. "Ladies and gentlemen, he's trying to intimidate us. The law is on our side. And that's when I knew her game. She wanted me to lose my temper on camera, to look like the crazy, villainous cowboy on social media. Well, two could play that game. I pulled out my own phone, hit record, and narrated the scene like a true crime documentary, filming the ripped-down no trespassing signs, the busted fence posts, the campfires dug into the dry pasture, and Veronica's smug face. Then I called the sheriff. When Deputy Tate finally rolled up an hour later, weaving his cruiser through the RV gauntlet, he was apologetic. He skimmed Veronica's paperwork, some bogus HOA declaration, and shook his head. Mr. Miller, I sympathize. But she's right. This is a civil dispute over boundaries. I can't remove them without a court order. Veronica just stood there, hands on her hips, radiating triumph. The campers roared approval. She'd won the first round, and I was left standing in a sea of strangers burning my pasture into ash and calling it fun. But my father's wisdom echoed, don't waste your breath fighting on their terms. Let the land do the talking. I drove back to the house, poured a fresh cup, and pulled out the old binder. It wasn't just deeds. It was my father's legacy of paperwork, proof that the laws written in this soil predated their flimsy vinyl houses by generations. Veronica thought she had the power of the HOA. I had the power of county statute. My land wasn't a green belt. It was a working ranch with livestock protections, and our county had open-range laws that gave me leverage she couldn't even imagine. I spent the rest of the day in methodical quiet. I didn't shout. I didn't threaten. I just typed. First, I drafted a formal notice of livestock movement. Clear, dry language, stamped with the date. Filed it with the sheriff's office, animal control, and the county commissioner. It stated that due to rotational grazing needs, the Black Brigade, 24 massive 2,000-pound bulls, would be moved from the north pasture to the south pasture, starting precisely at high noon on Saturday. Anyone on the property, without authorization, would be responsible for their own safety. Perfectly legal. Perfectly ordinary ranch work. Then I drafted a lawsuit, not just for trespass, but for nuisance, property damage, and environmental hazard. I attached time-stamped photos of every ripped fence post and every pile of trash. I cited county code about fire hazards and illegal gatherings without permits. I taped copies of the livestock movement notice to Veronica's shiny Lexus and the HOA office door. When you deal with someone who only respects paperwork, you bury them in it. You build a wall of receipts so high they can't climb down. I hired two trusted wranglers, Jake and Tom, who knew my herd as well as I did. We walked the bulls that evening, checking hooves, shaking feed buckets. They were calm, massive shadows against the dusk, chewing cud, steady as granite. Meanwhile, Veronica's Freedom Campout roared on the other side of the fence, blaring music, rattling generators, and stinking like a cheap landfill. I just kept documenting. Every clip, every photo, straight into the folder labeled HOA evidence. I went to bed that night not angry, but peaceful, because the clock was ticking. And at noon tomorrow, the only law that mattered would be the oldest one. Respect the land or get out of its way. I didn't lose a wink of sleep. High noon in July is no joke on the ranch. The sun hangs overhead like a white-hot coin, and the air is thick enough to drink. That's why, when I slipped the latch on the north gate, the first low snore from my lead bull echoed across the field like a cannon shot. The Black Brigade, 24 of the biggest, calmest, blackest Angus bulls you've ever seen, lifted their heads. Their shoulders rippled, horns catching the sunlight. Jake, my wrangler, whistled low beside me. "Lord, Ethan," he murmured, "they look like the cavalry." "They are," I replied, slipping the latch chain into my pocket. Slowly, deliberately, the herd began to move. Dust rose under their hooves, curling into the still, hot air. To anyone who understood livestock, it was just a pasture shift, controlled, guided by our subtle whistles and staff taps. But to 500 campers clutching their solo cups and selfie sticks, it looked like the ground itself was waking up. Gasps ripped through the crowd. Some scrambled for their phones, climbing onto coolers for a better angle. Drone cameras buzzed overhead, streaming the spectacle. I could almost hear the view counters exploding. Veronica, Ever the showman grabbed her megaphone, her voice cracking. "Don't panic. Stand your ground. He's bluffing. They can't touch us." But no one believed her. Not with 24 2,000-pound bulls fanning out across the greenbelt, their snorts vibrating the air. One of the younger bulls, just showing off, kicked up his heels, tossing dirt. The crowd shrieked and scattered. Tents collapsed like paper bags. Parents screamed, dragging children toward the RVs. We didn't push the herd. We didn't hurry them. They just moved steady as tractors, following the line we'd marked. But the campers saw only chaos. Then it happened. One bull, unimpressed, brushed past a shiny, expensive golf cart parked too close to the fence. The metal crumpled like a soda can, setting off its alarm in a hysterical wail. The bull snorted, completely unimpressed, and kept walking. That was the breaking point. "Call 911, someone screamed. "They're going to kill us." Funny thing is, the sheriff was already there. Deputy Tate's cruiser rolled up just as the bulls entered the middle of the campground. He stepped out, took one look at the panicked mob and the controlled herd, and whistled. "Well, I'll be," he said, adjusting his hat. "That's one way to clear a trespass." Veronica rushed him, megaphone still blaring. "Arrest him. Arrest that rancher. He unleashed wild animals on innocent families." Deputy Tate held up the folded notice I'd filed. "Ma'am," he said coolly, "those are livestock, not wild animals. And according to this notice, which I received yesterday, Mr. Miller is conducting a scheduled, lawful drive. He is within his rights." He glanced at the Black Brigade, who were placidly plodding along in formation. They looked pretty well behaved to me. Safer than half the folks driving ATVs out here. We guided the herd toward the south gate like a slow, deliberate tide. The campers had no choice but to retreat. The campground was a wreck. Folding chairs scattered like leaves, coolers tipped over, deep ruts carved in my pasture by the panicked exit. Veronica stood trembling, her hat askew, her clipboard bent in half. "This isn't over," she spat. "I'll have your ranch condemned if it's the last thing I do." The sheriff crossed his arms. "Ma'am, from where I'm standing, it looks like you endangered them. No permits, fire hazards, trespassing. You're lucky no one's hurt." I tipped my hat, whistled the bulls through the gate, and locked the latch. The pasture was quiet again. The show was over, but the battle had just begun. Like I said, humiliation fuels people like Veronica. The next morning, I got served an emergency injunction request from her. Claims of reckless endangerment, psychological distress, and, my personal favorite, animal cruelty for forcing livestock into hostile conditions. I laughed so hard I spilled my coffee. Meanwhile, the HOA was bleeding out. The county fire marshal wrote citations for illegal bonfires. The environmental officer nearly gagged at the gray water dumping. The HOA's insurance carrier quietly froze coverage, citing pending investigation of unpermitted events. Every fine, every damage claim would come straight from the HOA's budget, and Veronica was responsible. We met with my lawyer, Dale. Veronica had 3 sharp-suited lawyers and mountains of bluster. I had my single, heavy binder, my wall of receipts. Her team played shaky, dramatic video clips. They painted me as a rogue cowboy. Then Dale stood. He didn't raise his voice. He laid out the evidence. Survey maps, my lawful notice to the sheriff, county citations for the HOA's illegal dumping and fire hazards, and the trail cam footage of her campers cutting my fences. Fact versus fiction. But then came a knockout blow. Dale handed the judge one last document. Receipts showing I had quietly purchased delinquent tax liens tied to several of the HOA's common area parcels. The judge's eyebrows shot up. So, the HOA trespassed on the plaintiff's land, and their president misrepresented ownership of land the HOA doesn't even fully control, which the plaintiff now has legal leverage over? Veronica's smirk dissolved into ash. The ruling was swift. The judge tossed her claims, upheld my ranching rights, and ordered the HOA to pay damages for trespass, property damage, and every cent of my legal fees. Furthermore, the judge compelled the HOA to reimburse the county fines and fund the entire fence repair. The gavel cracked like a rifle shot. Case closed. Veronica didn't even make it a week. Her neighbors, furious over the skyrocketing dues and fines she'd caused, packed the next HOA meeting. She tried to defend herself, clipboard shaking in her hands, but it was no use. She was voted out on the spot, leaving red-faced and muttering about revenge. The new board president, a good-natured guy named Harris, came to my gate and simply said, "We're done fighting, Ethan. Let's fix this fence and move on." And they did. For the next month, the fence line, once a battlefront, became a boundary respected by both sides. Crews hauled out the garbage. Volunteers from the subdivision helped seed the grass, learning to stretch wire alongside my wranglers. It was surreal. I leaned on the repaired cedar post one evening, watching the Black Brigade graze quietly in the south pasture, their shadows long and calm. The land had reclaimed its dignity. Veronica vanished soon after, but the best twist? Thanks to those tax liens I purchased, I now have legal leverage over key parts of their common area. I won't take the land, but every new HOA board from now until eternity has to acknowledge one simple, written truth. The rancher next door is not to be crossed lightly. I won not by screaming, but by standing my ground. I won because paper weighs more than shouting, receipts are sharper than insults, and patience. Patience is the strongest weapon of all. This whole mess taught me one thing I want to pass on to you. Boundaries matter. Not just property lines, but boundaries in life. People will always push them, prod them, try to convince you that community or common good is a reason to trample what's yours. But standing firm isn't selfish, it's survival. The trick is how you stand.